Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. This is Kechijian here. I just wanted to introduce some changes that we're going to be making for the upcoming season. Historically, we've interviewed people from a variety of fields, not just in sports rehabilitation and sports performance, to try to make the themes a little bit more global. And while we don't want to change that, we still want this podcast and the content to transcend what we're doing as sports rehabilitation and performance professionals. We've also gotten a lot of feedback from people saying that they would like a little bit more of the micro level stuff. So how do we actually apply some of this information? What do we actually do when we work with athletes? Because it's great to have a bunch of abstract ideas and theories, but how do we make that actionable? So while we still want this to be kind of a broad podcast where people from a variety of disciplines and fields can get some useful information, we're going to increase the frequency with which we release episodes so that we still want to have the traditional, question and guest format where it's going to be a little bit more global in nature, but we want to release the podcast on a more weekly basis so that in the weeks where we don't have a guest in a more traditional podcast format, we want to have more of an informal educational platform where we talk with, have roundtable discussions, present our own case studies, and even just things that we're kind of working on, and just to really try to tease out how to make our athletes better. And again, just try to provide like an informal educational platform where people will get the big picture ideas, but also how to apply some of that information. So with that, I'll introduce my partners, Greg Spatz and Trevor Rappa, and let them kind of introduce what it is that they're going to be contributing to the podcast. So I guess we'll start with Trevor.
Yeah, I'm Trevor Rappa. I think one of the reasons we wanted to change up the format a little bit is because of the benefit that we had with our clinicals and being with somebody who we can kind of always ask questions to and actually get an idea of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis really helped all of our learning. So as much as we love theory and we love learning more of these kind of global concepts, ultimately what makes somebody successful as a practitioner is what they do on a day-to-day basis with their actual clients. So that's kind of, we wanted to go a little bit more in that route of having discussions between the three of us, like Doug said, about patients that we're seeing, but also get on other professionals, coaches and clinicians to actually kind of go through case studies and talk about things that they actually do. Because we've always tried to be as authentic and as transparent as we can be. Because I really think that's one of the best ways to learn is to actually see what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and then Greg, do you have anything to add about your particular piece and things that, you want to add or we're going to add collectively compared to what we did in the past?
I think Trevor kind of hit the nail on the head there. We want to add in a few different types of segments, a few different types of pieces of content where we're bringing in other people, having roundtable discussions. And I think the cases are going to be really, really fun to do. Because I know, like in my own head, I'll do case studies throughout the week. Just what do I want to do next? What did I do that I should have done differently? I think it's just going to be fun to have it be bounced off of you guys and talk about a patient that's progressing post-op or is more towards the performance end of things, and how do we get them ready for their sport more so than sort of the clinical stuff. But besides case studies, and I think we're going to bring on a different type of guests too, or we'll bring on other people who are performing day to day with clients, with athletes, and hear about what they do and actually ask them to bring their own case studies, bring their own videos of obviously confidentiality if that's needed to be protected, then whatever they have to do. But hopefully they could bring in some videos to demonstrate things of what they've done with their patients or their clients and athletes. And I think that's probably going to be the best way that we all learn. Like Trevor said, we were able to have some great clinicals, and we've learned so much from other professionals just through asking questions and being interested. So I know we're welcoming questions from anybody. I think it's going to be good to have. We might take one question and talk about it for a half hour. We don't really know. It could be an entire episode based off one question. So that could be fun. And then, Doug, you had already mentioned about bringing on PT students and trying to make it more of a, how does the student turn into the clinician progression? I think that's going to be interesting to do. And I think we have one that'll probably be lined up soon. So that's exciting.
I think another good point, sorry, Doug, that we want to do is, we're in a very fortunate situation that there's three of us and we can always, in like a judgment-free zone, ask each other questions without kind of being berated, which is what happens when you go online and you try to ask a question on a PT forum. If you're kind of do a different methodology than the person who answers your question, you get ripped apart and shredded. So it kind of creates this fear of not wanting to ask questions. And that's not what we're going to be doing with this podcast. And I think actually getting other clinicians to ask questions about like their own cases, and just you can get another opinion on like, what would you do if somebody's missing XYZ, or we want to improve this quality? Like, what's just some of the strategies you would do? Because, like one of our clinical, one of our CIs that we all had, Alan Groover, I remember like one of the things he told me that has always stuck with me was like, everything works. So just because it's not what we would do, it's always fun to ask other people, like, what would you do in that situation? Because their technique could work just as good as ours is, or vice versa. But it's just good to be able to have like an actual open dialogue about helping clients, not about feeding our own ego with how we answer the question.
Yeah, 100%. And like part of the problems with a lot of the internet platforms is that they don't actually allow for discussion. You're limited with characters. And sometimes even when you read something, you can't gauge somebody's tone or demeanor. So we want to make this more interactive. And while we kind of have our ideas for what content we think is important and interesting, we also want the content to be driven by the audience. So to Greg's point, we're going to be soliciting questions from listeners and audience members. We're going to be reaching out to different, organizations, whether it's like physical therapy programs, strength and conditioning staffs, and even, sports organizations, and just like having these conversations with them and letting listeners dictate the content. Because sometimes like we don't always ask the right questions. And this is also equally informative for us, where like people are asking questions that we're not thinking about. And if we don't have the answer, it forces us to get better too. So we definitely, I personally, as you guys know, I'm very tech inept. And, one of the things that I benefited from over the last 6 weeks, one of the few things is that, you realize that there are platforms that are much more conducive to sharing information with a wider audience, including the one that we're on now, Zoom. So for example, if somebody asks us a question about, hey, like, what would you do with this athlete? Instead of talking through it, which we're still going to do, now we can screen share, and we can actually like look at athletes and do movement analysis. And so we're going to offer, the video platform and the audio platform. And depending on what's convenient for you, you'll have access to both. But I think that, we want to kind of step things up technologically too, just to allow, again, for just better dialogue all around. So you guys want to add anything to that?
I did have something I wanted to say. I forgot because you were just so engaging. I was just so locked into those eyes. No, I can't think of it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's true. We want to make this like as positive of an experience for the listeners and stuff, for the viewers as we can. So we want feedback. We want questions. We want to know like what are the things that you guys want to learn, because like Doug said, like there's so many times that somebody asks us a question, or like patients ask a question, I'm like, I've never thought about that. You got to come up with an answer kind of on the spot, but it'd be nice to be able to kind of spend time like figuring things out for ourselves, because we get better by answering questions and asking questions ourselves. So I'm looking forward to just that process of seeing like what are some of the things that other people are thinking about, because it's very easy to kind of get stuck in your own lane and not be able to have an idea of kind of what else is going on around you, and being more open, having dialogue and discussion and asking questions is a great way to get better at that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up was, you might get stuck in your little bubble. Like if I'm seeing all these baseball athletes, I might get stuck in baseball.
And you're rubbing elbows.
And I'm just rubbing elbows and I'm just thinking about baseball all the time. Whereas like, one of you guys who you have more football or tennis or whatever sort of military background, where you don't have you're not almost like so pigeonholed by baseball itself that you think of something that I didn't think of, because I'm so focused on what's already there, what's already in baseball, versus like, well, in track and field, I do this. So have you thought about doing that? And it's like, no, you absolutely should do that. So I think that's going to be cool to hear from different people and talk about different things, and kind of goes back to what all the episodes Doug's already done on his own, where you're asking people from the music or theater world about how to be excellent at what they do, and how to improve performance, fully, and then also like X's and O's wise. And you've had so many great guests on that hopefully we can get some of them to come back and kind of expand on some things. But I think that kind of from the macro level down to the micro, I think it'll be cool to see how it all feeds into each other. And one person talking about something in a different field is going to help us clinically with our patients. And I think that's the focus too. We don't want to keep things esoteric and complex, or over complicate things. We want to keep the complexity, make it applicable, change something that's too complex or is overcomplicated, and and turn it into something that we can use clinically, because everything somebody might talk about is important, but it's like, okay, how does that change what I do tomorrow with XYZ patient?
Yeah, and I think the more people you talk to from different fields, the more you realize that everyone's trying to kind of solve the same problems, and certain themes emerge. And we're going to make a clear delineation between, like, these are the episodes that are really more for the strength and conditioning coach or the sports rehabilitation professional. These are the ones that are a little bit broader, so that, you know, the expectations are clear. But one thing that we've gotten feedback on is when we do kind of these broader podcasts, which we think are still important, even if we're talking about like the sports performance world, like everybody thinks that things like load management and graded exposure are important, or if it's like desensitization when it comes to treating a pain patient. And like these terms, you know, we all accept them as being like, these are legitimate, but no one, you know, especially with a lot of the forums, they're not conducive to like, well, what does load management actually mean? So whereas like in the past, you know, I haven't asked coaches specifically, like, what do you do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday? We're going to have episodes where we actually address that. So we get beyond the abstracts. And again, it's not that like, we're not bringing on guests that we're saying this is the best way of doing something, including what we're doing. But I think that the more we expose audience members and even ourselves to different ways of doing things, that's the only way that we learn. And I think that like the reason that we kind of came around to this format is that our mentors have been really transparent with us. And that's like the only way to learn, right? It's just that apprenticeship model. And now through technology, we can connect to a lot more people and have a lot more mentors. And we're all basically apprenticed to that guest that's on there. And, you know, the nice thing about running your own podcast is that you can be the gatekeeper. So we're going to keep things, you know, civilized and cordial. We're not going to allow any trolls. And I think, you know, Trevor, you made the point that like, you want to be able to ask a question and not get berated. It can be a lot harder to do that on, you know, on Twitter, but that's not going to be the case here because first of all, we screen our guests. And second of all, if someone's acting like a jerk, you know, we're just going to press the mute button. So
X them out.
Yeah.
I mean, first rule of thumb, you have to be a good person, right? So there we go.
Absolutely.
And I think that the reality is like, even when you see people arguing on social media, most of them are good people. And if you got them in the same room, the discussion would be a lot different. It's just that the platform isn't always conducive to having a discussion because you often feel the need to defend yourself. And then when you say something, someone kind of, you know, like kind of champions for the other side. It becomes like, it's almost like you're on the playground and you really didn't mean to get into a fight, but then all these other people are like, you guys should fight. And then, you know, and then that kind of spirals out of control. So, you know, we're going to be like the aides in the playground and try to get down to, you know, what are the questions that really matter, but do it in a way where no one's jumping off the swing set and doing macho man elbows onto somebody else.
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's right. Yeah. So, and we're doing this, we're starting this during this pandemic, right? So we've been sort of locked up for 7 weeks or so, getting back into some of the brick and mortar in-person therapy as it's sort of, you know, being regulated, you know, regulations are being removed and we're able to see people based on our comfort and their comfort. What are some other things that you guys have done during the pandemic at home that is new for us, or, you know, are things that we want to start doing more of?
I mean, I would say like for myself, just by, you know, having such a lightened caseload and just having more time in general, I've spent way more time just reading different books and kind of getting back into my own, you know, education. Which is hard to do when you're, you know, busy like we are, and I'm just seeing patients. You kind of, you know, seeing patients almost feeds into that staying in your own bubble more because you're just doing the same thing kind of over and over in terms of seeing patients without kind of taking a step back and trying to fill your holes a little bit. So I've done a lot more of, you know, reading some different biomechanics textbooks and things like that, trying to just improve my understanding of a lot of things that I continually have questions on.
Yeah, I mean,
you're working on like your own little project too for like the change of direction stuff.
Yeah,
that's future. Hopefully by the end of the year.
Yep, that's the goal.
Yeah, I think like Trevor said, just devouring Con Ed, which is something that, you know, when you're doing the hours upon hours of patient treatment is much harder to do, and then on top of the documentation and the administrative responsibilities. So between that, you know, like I never before this it's been a long time where I really had time to actually talk to people. It's always text messaging and emails. And, you know, obviously this is not a replacement for talking to somebody in person, but I've actually had a lot more just conversations with people, whether it's on the phone or even on Zoom or Skype. And it's nice to talk to people. It's obviously, you forget that, like, yes, it's nice to have a very quick and accessible means of communication, but something is lost with that that efficiency. So a lot more of those kind of conversations, which is kind of the goal of what we're trying to do going forward. And then beyond that, working on more big picture stuff, like as an individual and as a company, right? So like we're starting to get into some digital education. We're working on kind of like an online or digital therapeutic platform that's kind of like a triage or a screening filter for, physical therapy and musculoskeletal pain. These are things that you can't do when you're bogged down with the day-to-day patient treatment. So I think, like everybody else, we all struggle with, like, we love what we do, but we also want to work on bigger picture, broader initiatives. And how do we balance that? And I would say that, like, before everything with this COVID, we've been unbalanced from the standpoint of, like, we were just totally hyper-focused on patient treatment because it brings income in and it's hard to walk away from that. And now we don't really have a choice but to do other things. And there's going to be a point pretty soon where we have to go back to the brick and mortar, but at least we'll have been exposed to both extremes. And now we can try to figure out a better, sliding scale or balance for ourselves.
Definitely. I think that point of balance is huge, Doug. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, no, that's been really hard for me, the balance. I feel like I'm always thinking about stuff that we are doing or could be doing or should be, whatever it is or have done. And I'm like always working or always on, as opposed to, making the time to do other things, or like, I've been video chatting with like family and friends like on a weekly basis. And it's like, oh, wow, like this has been here forever and we haven't done it ever. And, I might not see these people for months if, they live in other states, and it's like, now I'm seeing them every week, and it's now going to be like part of life, which is cool. And it definitely sort of, you have to shift gears and go in and out of work mode, which I like. I need to be better at that for sure. And yeah, I mean, in the first like 5 weeks or 4 weeks of the pandemic, I was working on our online course and just setting up all the web pages for that and getting all the videos prepped for that. And that was a lot of time and very time consuming. It was almost like I felt like I had to be doing that because I was home and like doing nothing besides that. But I'm glad I did it, because that's, like you said, Doug, like we've been working on this thing for, I think you recorded your video in 2018. I think in like November or December.
Yeah, it was like 2 years ago.
Something we've had sitting there for a long time, and then it was just a matter of like, all right, we got to get this thing done. And we had all the video recorded, and we just needed to have it all actually completely done and put in place for the end user to access it. So that's been awesome that we released that. We've had some pretty good feedback from people, I think, and hopefully we'll get some more. But that's our Movement Foundations course. And I don't know, you guys want to talk about that at all, or you don't have to? But
no, it's the point is, like, I don't even know when that would have gotten finished if this pandemic thing hadn't have happened, because we had it on the shelf, but like the editing was time consuming, and you did a lot of the work for that. We've gotten some good feedback from coaches even who are mentors to us that we respect a lot. So I think that like it's applicable to novice coaches and to even higher level coaches, because it's really just like taking the basics and then how do you scale the basics, because everything comes down to basics anyway and fundamentals. It's kind of like pick and roll in basketball, right? Like if you execute that properly, it's really hard to stop. And even in the NBA, like ultimately it's about creating space and creating matchups, and there's only so many ways to do that. But how do you apply those basics and connect those dots? But I think go ahead.
As I say, it might not be sexy either, which is like a lot of the stuff we do is like 90% of the stuff we do is a lot of the same things, and they're quote unquote basic, but they're more just like foundational things that everybody needs to be able to do these things to reach their goals. And it's like, okay, that's where we started with this course, is like, this is the foundation, and we're gonna have these sort of like bounce off specialized modules after that. But definitely like mastering these basics are like, I still need to be going through our own course and doing these things for myself, I know. So
because I think everybody talks, everybody says at least that, like, the fundamentals are always key, and you got to go back to your fundamentals and always know the basics and stuff, but they're rarely ever kind of laid out and described in like, what does that actually look like? And us as coaches and clinicians, it's like the only thing that we are consistently really using to assess is our eyes. And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to show with this course, is like, what does that look like? Because that's always a question of mine that I've had, like, ever since I've been coaching athletes or in PT school. It's like, okay, like, this is bad. Well, okay, that's fine, but like, what does that look like? So we try to show what what is good, quote unquote good, because it's relative. What does a good squat look like? What is a good deadlift? What is a good split squat? What is a good push-up? Just all the basic things that we have to do as humans. It's like, what does it actually look like? And I think that is ultimately the foundation of where we have to start, either as a coach or as a clinician, is just knowing what are we starting at, what are we looking for, and then we can coach from there.
Yeah, I never remember, like, as a student thinking, man, like all these top-notch professionals, they must be doing some of the craziest stuff with their clients that, like, I need to go take years and years of this crazy educational sort of system to actually be able to help anybody at all. And it's really not that different when people actually share what they're doing. It's like, oh, like that's okay. Yeah, I can do that too. And that was definitely, something that I know I learned from Alan. It's like, it's not always some crazy answer. Sometimes people just need to be able to extend their hip a little bit more, and then things get better. And, that just sort of snowballs into like putting layers onto it. And then when you do get these complex patients, you've already got the low hanging fruit, and it's like, okay, now I need to dig deeper into other things that I'm not currently doing. What are you going to say, Doug?
Yeah, and I think that like one of the things that we're going to be unapologetic about is that we do the same things with a lot of people, and we're going to bring on guests where you're going to be like, yeah, these guys are all kind of saying the same thing. And I think that like now we live in a time where, we celebrate novelty for the sake of novelty, but like there's a reason why certain things, tradition doesn't always mean that something is good, but like there's a reason why like the way to develop athletes historically has been like you do some kind of, strength training, you sprint and you jump. And then it's like, it's a recipe, like there's only so many ways to make pizza, but some pizza tastes better than others, even though they're all using tomato sauce and spices and dough and cheese. But it's like, how do you put those pieces together? So those basic, building blocks are pretty much the same. It's just how do you apply it for the athlete at hand? But again, like we're not trying to be novel for the sake of being novel. But one thing, because Trevor kind of sparked this, when you're talking about like what some of these projects are helpful for doing. I know that like, hosting the first 2 seasons of the podcast for me, when you have to ask people questions and be prepared and not sound like an idiot online, it forces you to think about things more clearly because, you're the one asking the questions, right? And you can only get so much out of a guest if you're not prepared. What releasing some of these products has helped me with, and I think I could speak for all you guys, is like sometimes you just get in the habit of treating or doing things and you rely on your intuition, and that can work a lot of the time, but being able to like the fact that we wrote everything out, like we had movement categories, and yes, like they're arbitrary, but within each category we have progressions of like all these exercises, because sometimes I'll be stumped and I'll be like, what am I supposed to do with this person? And it's like, why don't I just look at the list that I created? Oh yeah, like I can do that. But if you don't have it written out and you don't have it systematized, now you're relying on intuition all the time. So like systematizing things has helped us, I think, keep ourselves honest. And you don't want to be robotic and have to always, rely on like looking at a piece of paper to do something, but it is helpful because we're all human and we all kind of just forget stuff and get stumped. So that's kind of the idea is I think going forward, like we want to systematize everything that we do, not just like the strength training, not just the change of direction work and the speed work and the conditioning, but even what we're doing as a business, and hoping to just share that with everybody else, really, because we know that if we share, then other people will share and it's going to make us better. So there's a selfish motive behind it too.
Yeah, I think going through that writing process and like the creative process and putting your thoughts to paper, to the computer, really is like, even if we didn't release the course, just the process of the three of us kind of going through and creating that process, going through the process of creating the course together is immensely beneficial. It's like, even if you're not creating a product or trying to release anything, just, kind of having one goal in mind and having questions that you're trying to answer, and actually not just thinking about them, but going through the process of creating it and putting it down is, it's been so helpful for all of us.
Definitely.
All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good introduction. We want to get going with the guests and the content in future episodes. Before, any parting shots from you guys before we wrap it up?
No, I think we're really excited about for people. Definitely excited to get people engaged, get some questions, topics, get some different people on here, get groups of people on here to do it all together, and it'd be fun to get some friends and just bounce ideas off each other.
Yeah, we're limited by our Zoom membership, right? So whatever membership we have, whether it's 40 people,
we have, I think
that's what we can accommodate.
Up to 100. Yeah, up to 100. Wow. So we can get 97 more of you. 97 more.
97 guests.
And then, we'll have some links in the show notes to, like to the course, I don't know if anybody's interested in signing up for our mailing list, because that's how we usually will like announce things, or when we release things, we'll send an email blast to everybody. It's also on our social media, so it's like you could pick whichever route you like to follow people on and hear from them, because it's probably redundant to get on all of them, but you're welcome to if you'd like.
And we'll include a link in all the show notes where people can submit questions specifically for the podcast, so it kind of gets consolidated into one place. And we want that to drive a lot of our content. So the more active the audience is, the more active we're going to be, and bring episodes to everybody.
I would say ask questions. Please ask questions. That is exactly where we're trying to take the podcast, is trying to help the listeners and help ourselves at the same time. But that ultimately starts with us asking questions and whoever's listening asking questions too. So thank you for taking the time to listen to this.
Thank you.